Story 1. The Abandoned School. I was 17 when my friends convinced me to sneak into an abandoned elementary school in our town. The building was boarded up, its windows shattered, and the playground rusted with age. We slipped through a hole in the fence, hearts pounding with excitement. The classroom smelled of mildew and dust, desks scattered, and books molding in the corners. I remember running my hand over a chalkboard that still had faint math equations written on it. It felt like a place frozen in time, untouched for decades. We reached the gymnasium, where the bleachers had collapsed inward. As I pointed my flashlight across the room, I saw movement, something darting behind the basketball hoop. At first, I thought it was an animal, but when we left, someone whispered our names, my actual name, echoing across the empty hallway. None of my friends admitted to saying it, and I'll never step foot near that school again. Story 2. The Graveyard Shortcut. Walking home late at night, I decided to take a shortcut through the cemetery. The air was damp, and the moonlight cast eerie shadows across the headstones. I thought it would save me 10 minutes. Halfway through, I noticed fresh soil around one grave, as if it had recently been disturbed. My curiosity got the better of me, so I walked closer, ignoring the chill crawling up my spine. The ground looked like it had been dug up, but hastily covered again. Suddenly, I heard shuffling behind me. I spun around. In the pale light, I saw a figure crouching near another grave, watching me. They didn't move, just stared as if I had interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. I bolted out of that cemetery, never taking the shortcut again. To this day, I can't shake the image of that person silently crouching among the graves, waiting. Story 3. The Locked Hospital Ward. A group of us broke into an old hospital set for demolition. Most of the building had been stripped, but we heard rumors that one ward was still locked up, untouched since the closure. Naturally, that's where we went. We forced the door open, and the stench of rot hit us. The ward was filled with rusted beds, broken floor stands, and decaying curtains that looked like they hadn't moved in years. It was like stepping back in time. As we explored, I found a patient chart left on a bedside table. The last note dated back 20 years, describing a patient's violent tendencies. Right then, we heard a dragging sound coming from the far end of the hall. We ran, but not before catching sight of a shadow moving toward us. To this day, none of us can explain how something, or someone, was still moving inside a sealed ward. Story 4. The Old Farmhouse. When I was a kid, an old farmhouse sat abandoned near my grandparents' property. My cousin dared me to go inside with him one summer afternoon. The wooden floor creaked as we stepped in, and the whole place smelled of rot and mold. We found old furniture covered in sheets, photographs on the wall of a family with blank expressions. The deeper we went, the colder it felt, like the house itself wanted us gone. In one bedroom, a rocking chair began to sway slowly on its own. My cousin swore it was just the wind, but every window in that room was shut tight. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating. We bolted before we could investigate further. Later, my grandparents told us the family who owned the house vanished in the 1960s. No one knows what happened to them. Story 5. The Tunnel Under the Bridge. There was a storm-drained tunnel under the old railway bridge where kids dared each other to go. I decided to prove myself one night, and went in with only a flashlight. The tunnel smelled of wet concrete and sewage. The deeper I went, the more graffiti I saw. Strange symbols rather than words. Some of them looked fresh, like someone had been down there recently. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing back at me. When I turned a corner, I saw a candle still burning, melted wax dripping onto the floor. A pile of animal bones lay in the center, arranged in a circle. That's when I heard voices chanting, faint but getting closer. I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. When I told others, they laughed, but I'll never forget those whispers rising behind me in the dark. Story 6. The Mansion on the Hill. There was a massive, decaying mansion on the edge of town, rumored to be haunted. One Halloween, we trespassed, climbing the rusted gate. The driveway was overgrown and the windows all shattered. Inside, the house felt suffocating. Chandeliers hung crookedly. Portraits stared down at us with blank, judging eyes. Every room had peeling wallpaper and furniture left to rot. In the grand staircase hall, we found a set of children's toys neatly arranged on the steps, as if someone had been playing recently. But the dust was thick everywhere else. Except there, we left in silence, shaken. Nobody could explain how toys ended up placed there in a house untouched for decades. Story 7. The Cabin in the Woods. A friend and I stumbled upon a hidden cabin while hiking off-trail. It looked abandoned, roof sagging, shutters hanging loose, but something about it felt wrong. We decided to peek inside. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings about missing hikers. Some were decades old, but others looked recent. A table was set with plates, but all of them had rusted knives stuck into the wood. Suddenly, a door at the back slammed shut. We hadn't touched it. The whole cabin seemed to groan as if something had woken up. My friend whispered that we needed to leave. We sprinted back to the trail and never looked back. Weeks later, another hiker went missing in that same forest. Story 8. The Forgotten Subway Station. In the city, I discovered an entrance to an old subway station closed for years. Curiosity got the better of me, so I slipped inside late at night. Dust and darkness swallowed everything. The tracks stretched into blackness, and old advertisements still clung to the walls. The silence was eerie, broken only by the dripping of water. I walked carefully, my flashlight barely cutting through the dark. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a train screeching on rails. But the station had been shut down decades ago. Lights flickered in the distance, glowing faintly. I ran before I could see what was coming. To this day, I wonder if I nearly saw a ghost train, or something worse. Story 9. The Hunting Shack. While exploring a wooded area, I came across an old hunting shack. The windows were boarded up, but I forced the door open. The smell inside was awful, like something had died there. There were hunting trophies on the wall, but they weren't animals. Each mounted piece looked disturbingly human, like masks made of skin. My blood ran cold. I heard footsteps approaching outside, crunching leaves. Whoever owned the shack was coming back. I dove out a broken window, cutting my arm badly, but I didn't care. I never told anyone exactly where it was. Some places are better left undiscovered. Story 10. The Church Basement. We broke into an abandoned church one night, daring each other to go inside. The pews were broken, and the altar was covered in graffiti. But a door behind the pulpit led to a basement. The stairs were steep, leading into total darkness. The air grew damp, heavy, and smelled like rust. At the bottom, we found cages, actual metal cages, lined up against the walls. Inside one, there were claw marks, deep grooves that looked like something had tried to get out. A pile of bones sat in another cage, long since dried. We ran, and I swear I heard something rattle in the cages as we fled. Story 11. The Mine Shaft. Deep in the woods near my hometown, there was an old mine sealed off with warning signs. My friend dared me to crawl through a gap in the fencing one evening. The air grew colder the farther we went. The walls were lined with old tools, rusted helmets, and wooden beams ready to snap. Water dripped constantly, echoing through the shaft. I could barely hear my own footsteps. Then I noticed fresh footprints in the mud. They didn't belong to us, and they led deeper into the mine. We followed them until they suddenly stopped mid-path, as if the person had vanished. That's when we heard a laugh behind us. Deep, guttural, and too close. We didn't look back. We ran until daylight touched our faces. Story 12. The School Boiler Room. During high school, kids whisper about the old boiler room beneath the gym. One night after a game, I snuck in, curious to see what was inside. The heavy door groaned as I pulled it open. The room was massive, filled with pipes that hissed with steam. Old chairs and boxes of forgotten supplies littered the floor. It looked like no one had been there in years. But then I saw a mattress tucked in the corner, surrounded by food wrappers and a stack of notebooks. I picked one up. Inside were disturbing sketches of students, some of them kids I recognized. I left the room shaking, never telling anyone. To this day, I wonder who was living down there, and if they're still watching. Story 13. The Old Amusement Park. An abandoned amusement park stood at the edge of town. My cousin and I climbed the fence one summer night, eager to explore. The ride stood silent, rusted skeletons against the moonlight. The carousel was still intact, horses frozen mid-gallop, paint peeling. I pushed it gently, and it creaked, rotating slowly in the dark. It felt wrong, like I had disturbed something. As we passed the roller coaster tracks, we heard music playing faintly. The carousel was spinning on its own now, lights flickering even though there was no electricity. We ran as laughter echoed across the park. I've never gone back near that place again. Story 14, the forest bunker. While hiking off-trail, I found a hatch hidden under the brush. It was heavy, but curiosity won. I descended a metal ladder into darkness, landing in a concrete bunker. The walls were lined with shelves of canned food, water jugs, and survival gear. But everything looked fresh, not abandoned. Whoever owned this place was still using it. Deeper inside, I found a room filled with maps and photographs pinned to the walls. Some were my own town, others of random people's houses, including my street. I didn't stay long enough to figure out why. The sound of the hatch slamming shut from above sent me scrambling up the ladder, terrified I'd be trapped inside. Story 15, the movie theater. There was an old movie theater closed down decades ago. My friends and I broke in through a side door one night. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but the velvet seats were still in neat rows. As we walked through the aisles, one of the projectors flickered on, filling the screen with static. We hadn't touched anything, and the electricity shouldn't have been working. On the screen, a film started to play, grainy footage of an audience sitting in the same theater. Only every single person stared blankly at the camera. Their faces looked lifeless. We bolted, and when I turned back, the figures on the screen were standing up as if following us. Story 16, the water tower. As kids, we climbed a water tower that was marked condemned. At the top, the hatch leading inside was broken, so we slipped through. The metal ladder led down into darkness. The tank was empty, the inside coated with rust and slime. Graffiti covered the walls, but one word repeated everywhere. Leave. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, we heard the hatch above slam shut. We panicked, shouting, thinking someone had locked us in. Then footsteps clanged against the ladder, slowly descending. We never waited to see who or what it was. We squeezed out a crack at the bottom and ran until we collapsed on the grass. Story 17, the nursing home. An abandoned nursing home near my neighborhood became a dare spot. I went in with two friends one evening, pushing through the broken front doors. The smell of decay lingered. Wheelchairs and walkers were left scattered in the hallways. Patient files were still in the offices, describing treatments that made no sense. Some mentioned patients not leaving the building. We turned a corner and saw a figure in a hospital gown standing at the end of the hall. Pale, unmoving, but definitely there. We froze in place. Then the lights flickered on, one by one, down the hall toward us. We didn't stay to see the figure move. Story 18, the river shack. While canoeing down a river, I saw a shack hidden among the trees. I paddled closer and tied off my boat. The place looked deserted, but the door swung open with a push. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings of faces, all in charcoal, smeared and overlapping. The air smelled like mildew and something sour. In the center of the shack was a chair with restraints and a camera on a tripod facing it. My stomach dropped as I realized what kind of place this might have been. Then I heard the sound of snapping twigs outside. Someone was coming back. I slipped out the window and pushed my canoe into the water without looking back. Story 19, the train graveyard. Near the edge of town was a yard filled with old, rusting train cars. My friends and I climbed inside one during the summer. The smell of oil and rot lingered in the stale air. Inside, there were blankets, food cans, and strange markings scratched into the walls. Some looked like tally marks, hundreds of them lined up neatly. We joked nervously about someone living there, until we noticed a fresh cigarette still burning in the corner. Someone had been there minutes before we entered. We didn't wait for them to return. The thought of being caught in that car with whoever, it was still gives me chills. Story 20, the forgotten barn. Behind a row of cornfields was a barn nobody used anymore. I entered one night with flashlight, stepping over broken boards and hay. The silence inside was thick. Against the far wall, I found rows of animal cages, all empty but stained. Chains hung from the rafters, swaying lightly as if moved by unseen hands. In the loft, I discovered a mattress with sheets still neatly tucked in. On the wall above it, carved into the wood, were dozens of names, including mine. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I never told anyone, because I couldn't explain how my name was already there. Story 21. The Sawmill. There was an abandoned sawmill on the edge of town where no one dared to go. My cousin and I snuck in one summer night, stepping over piles of rusted tools and broken planks. The silence was suffocating. Inside, the machines were still there, covered in dust. But one of them, the largest saw, was smeared with something dark, fresh-looking. My cousin swore it was rust, but I knew it wasn't. We heard a loud clank, like the machine powering on. But the place hadn't had electricity for decades. The saw blade twitched, shuddering as if trying to turn. We sprinted out, never daring to go back. Even from the road, I swear I still hear the sound of that blade grinding. Story 22. The Motel Room. Driving cross-country, I stopped at a rundown motel. Most of the rooms looked boarded up, but one door was left cracked open. Curiosity pulled me in. The room was filthy, stained carpet, mold creeping up the walls. But what unsettled me most was the dozens of Polaroid photos scattered across the bed. They showed different guests, all asleep in their rooms. In some, the people looked terrified, as if they woke up to the camera. My heart dropped when I noticed one of the photos was of me, sleeping in my car from the night before. I didn't wait. I ran back to my car and drove until sunrise, checking the mirrors every few minutes. Story 23. The Lighthouse. On vacation, I explored a lighthouse closed to public. The spiral staircase creaked as I climbed higher, the wind howling through broken windows. Halfway up, I found a room filled with journals. They all described the same thing, something in the sea calling me. The writing grew messier the further I read. At the top, instead of a lantern, there was a chair facing the ocean. On the chair, a rope tied down tight, frayed from struggle. As I turned to leave, I swear I heard someone whispering from the waves, calling my name. Story 24. The Orchard House. Near an abandoned apple orchard stood a collapsing farmhouse. I explored it once, stepping over rotting fruit scattered across the porch. Inside, jars of preserved apples still lined the shelves. But every jar contained something odd, tiny teeth floating among the apples. My stomach twisted as I realized what I was looking at. In the living room, children's shoes were arranged neatly in a circle. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and a trapdoor opened slightly beneath me. I didn't stay to see what was hidden below. The jars were enough. Story 25. The Bridge Shack. Under an old bridge, I found a shack made from scrap wood. It looked like someone had been living there. Inside, the walls were covered with maps of the town, circles drawn around specific houses. On a table sat a collection of driver's licenses, dozens of them, each belonging to a missing person. My blood went cold as I sifted through them. Suddenly, I heard a call from behind me. Someone was standing in the doorway, blocking the light. I ran, faster than I ever thought possible, never looking back. Story 26. The Train Tunnel. A disused train tunnel ran for miles beneath the hills. I walked in one evening, flashlight flickering. The air was damp, the walls dripping with condensation. Halfway through, I noticed writing on the wall, "Don't turn off the light." My heart raced as I kept moving forward. Then my flashlight died. Instantly, I felt movement all around me, shuffling footsteps, breathing, whispers too close. My shaking hand smacked the light until it flickered back on. The tunnel was empty again. I never went back. Story 27. The Carnival Trailer. At a fairground long abandoned, I found trailers where performers once lived. One was still locked, but I forced it open. Inside, costumes and makeup kits were scattered everywhere. A cracked mirror stood against the wall, smeared with handprints. On the vanity sat a mask shaped like a clown's face, its painted grin chipped. I picked it up and heard someone laugh behind me, but when I turned, the trailer was empty. The mask was gone from my hand. Story 28, The Forest Staircase. Deep in the woods, I stumbled upon a staircase leading nowhere. The wood was old but sturdy, rising about 15 steps before ending in midair. I climbed it out of curiosity. At the top, I felt dizzy, like the world had shifted. The forest around me seemed wrong. The trees were darker, the air heavier. Then I heard children laughing, but the sound was warped, echoing strangely. Shadows moved between the trees, too tall and too thin. I scrambled down the steps, and everything returned to normal. I've avoided that part of the woods ever since. Story 29, The Hidden Attic. Exploring my great-grandfather's old house, I found a hidden attic behind a false wall. Dust poured down as I pushed the panel open. Inside were dozens of dolls, all arranged in neat rows, staring with glassy eyes. Some were missing limbs. Others had human hair stitched into their scalps. In the corner sat a rocking horse, moving slightly even though the air was still. Beneath it was a diary filled with notes about keeping the children quiet. I slammed the panel shut, never telling anyone what I found. Story 30, The Highway Shack. Driving late one night, I saw a shack just off the highway. I pulled over, curious, and stepped inside. The smell of gasoline and decay was overpowering. The walls were covered in road maps, each marked with red X's along the highway. In the center of the shack sat a mannequin dressed in dirty clothes, a knife stuck in its chest. As I turned to leave, headlights flashed outside. A truck had pulled up silently, its engine idling. I bolted into the woods, not daring to look back.